Imagine your apiary at the end of winter. Temperatures are slightly rising, and nature is showing the first signs of life. How many times have you, at that exact moment, opened the hive and added sugar syrup, firmly believing that you are helping the colony's development? It sounds logical, doesn't it? But ask yourself the following questions. Did you know that the wrong timing of this intervention can irreversibly destroy your main flow? What if that added sugar does not actually feed the colony, but instead drains its thermal energy and slows its biological development? What if your feeding only creates a false image of strength, which will later result in a massive loss of profit? From the harsh, long winters in Canada and the northern parts of the United States, through the unpredictable and wet spring in the United Kingdom, all the way to the specific dry cycles in Australia, beekeepers around the world repeat the same fatal mistake. They forget that feeding is not just adding food. It is a radical intervention into the sensitive thermodynamics and metabolism of the bee colony. In this episode, completely objectively and scientifically, we separate facts from myths. We deconstruct the exact biological role of emergency feeding versus stimulative feeding. Stay with us, because the information that follows directly protects your investment. Spring is the most sensitive period in the life cycle of a bee colony. It is not a period of continuous growth, but a period of rigid balancing between available energy, brood volume, and external resources. The bee colony functions as a perfect biological organism whose primary goal is survival and reproduction. Every input of energy, whether it comes from nature in the form of nectar or from your feeder in the form of syrup, changes the metabolic status of the entire colony. When you pour syrup into the hive, you are not feeding bees in the same way livestock is fed. You are actually changing the chemical signals inside the colony. You are changing the behavior of the queen and redirecting the workforce from maintaining the microclimate to processing carbohydrates. This intervention has its biological cost. To understand the global picture, you must realize that the biology of the honeybee remains absolutely the same, regardless of whether it is in Alberta, Canada, or Queensland, Australia. The bee requires a constant brood temperature between 34.5 and 35 degrees Celsius. To produce this heat, the colony burns energy. Every drop of water you introduce through syrup must be evaporated. Evaporation requires heat, and heat production consumes calories. If you introduce the wrong type of feeding at a time when nights are cold, you are physically cooling the nest and forcing the bees into severe metabolic stress. That is why we divide feeding into two strict categories: emergency feeding and stimulative feeding. The difference between them is not in the amount of sugar, but in timing, concentration, and the final biological goal. Emergency feeding is not a growth strategy. This is not a method that will increase honey yield. This is exclusively a survival measure, an intervention by which you save your investment from total collapse. This type of feeding is applied only in one scenario: when the reserves of natural honey in the hive drop below the critical threshold of 6 to 8 kilograms, and there is no available nectar in nature. When reserves fall below this limit, the colony detects the danger of starvation. The queen receives a chemical signal to immediately stop laying eggs. Worker bees stop producing royal jelly. In extreme cases, cannibalism occurs. Adult bees consume their own brood in order to recover proteins and preserve energy. If you find yourself in this situation, the laws of thermodynamics are relentless. It is strictly forbidden to use thin syrup in a 1-to-1 ratio. Why? Because thin syrup contains 50% water. As we stated, eliminating that water requires enormous thermal energy. Hungry and exhausted bees simply do not possess that energy capacity. Attempting to save them with thin syrup in cold weather will lead to condensation, the appearance of nosema, and the physical death of the colony. In an emergency, only concentrated food is used. Thick syrup in a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 parts sugar, 1 part water, or solid honey sugar cakes are applied. Thick syrup requires minimal processing. Bees quickly transport it into cells around the brood, immediately eliminating the danger of starvation. Cakes are placed directly above the winter cluster, allowing bees to take food with minimal departure from the thermal center of the nest. The goal of emergency feeding is the rapid delivery of pure carbohydrates with the smallest possible thermal loss. There is no stimulation of the queen. There is no aggressive brood expansion. The colony is kept alive until climatic conditions stabilize and nature offers the first significant amounts of nectar. On the other side of the spectrum is stimulative feeding. This is the most powerful but also the most dangerous technique in modern apiculture. While emergency feeding focuses on survival, stimulative feeding represents targeted biological manipulation. The goal of this intervention is to trick the colony. By adding thin syrup in a 1-to-1 ratio, 1 part sugar, 1 part water, you artificially simulate the arrival of an early spring nectar flow. Forager bees bring in this thin liquid, and young nurse bees process it. This continuous intake simulates natural nectar. The queen, reading these signals, increases her laying capacity from a few hundred to over 1,500 to 2,000 eggs per day. The result is explosive demographic growth, programmed to coincide with the main flow. However, this strategy is successful only if 3 absolute biological conditions are met. The first condition: the colony must have a solid resource base. Stimulation is never performed on empty hives. The colony must have a minimum of 8 kilograms of capped honey. If you stimulate a starving colony, it will accelerate consumption and die of hunger before the young bees emerge. The second condition: external microclimate. Daytime temperatures must be high enough to allow bees to fly and cleanse, and nighttime temperatures must not drop drastically. Introducing thin syrup increases humidity in the hive, which must be eliminated through ventilation. The third and most important condition: absolute presence of protein, that is, pollen. This is the mistake that most often costs beekeepers in the United Kingdom and the United States. Sugar is exclusively a caloric fuel. Pollen is the building material, a source of proteins, lipids, and amino acids. When the queen starts massive egg-laying stimulated by syrup, young larvae require royal jelly. For the synthesis of royal jelly, pollen is necessary. If you stimulate the colony with syrup and there is not enough pollen in nature, nurse bees will deplete protein from their own bodies, vitellogenin, to feed the brood. As a result, a generation of workers with underdeveloped hypopharyngeal glands will emerge. These are the so-called sugar bees. Their lifespan is physiologically shortened by 30 to 40%. Instead of an army of foragers, you will get a weak population incapable of bringing in honey. Therefore, in regions where spring pollen is delayed, high-protein cakes must be added along with stimulative syrup. The stimulation technique requires rigid discipline. Syrup is not given in quantities of 5 liters at once. Dosing must be precise, 200 to 300 milliliters, every second or third evening. This small but constant amount simulates natural nectar secretion. If you pour a large amount at once, bees will quickly deposit that syrup into empty comb cells, physically blocking the queen. You will lose brood space, the colony will enter demographic stagnation, and the swarming instinct will be triggered before the main flow. Everything you do in spring must be mathematically aligned with the blooming of your main commercial plant, whether it is acacia in Europe, eucalyptus in Australia, or canola in Canada. The ontogenesis of a worker bee lasts exactly 21 days. After emergence, it needs an additional 15 to 20 days working inside the hive before it becomes a flying forager. This means that from the moment the queen lays an egg to the moment that bee starts bringing in nectar, a total of 40 days passes. If the start of your main flow is scheduled for May 15th, your stimulative feeding must be in full operation no later than the beginning of April. Every day of delay means that generation of bees will mature only after the flow has already passed. Instead of profit, you will get a huge number of empty consumers. A critical step is also stopping the stimulation. Exactly 10 days before the start of the main flow, all feeding must be absolutely stopped. Bees must consume the introduced syrup for feeding the last generations of brood. Cells in the comb must be completely empty and ready to receive natural nectar. Any retention of sugar in the hive during the flow will lead to mixing syrup with nectar, which represents direct falsification and economic degradation of your final product. This is a professional standard that must not be violated. Also, before the start of the flow, the colony must be provided with a large amount of space. Adding honey supers with empty comb and foundation is mandatory. The young army of bees you created through stimulation possesses excess energy. If you do not provide them with space for nectar storage and wax secretion, that energy will be directed toward raising queen cells. Swarming on the eve of the main flow means losing the entire production season. To summarize, feeding in spring is not a routine. It is a biological tool. If you apply it at the wrong moment, you will cause damage. If you apply it correctly, with precise analysis of climatic conditions and the state of reserves, you will maximize your yield. In March, the focus is on survival and emergency feeding with dense food. In April, the focus shifts to precise, small stimulation and mandatory protein intake to build the workforce. In May, all intervention stops, and the focus shifts to adding space and collecting nectar. Do not work blindly. Observe reserves, observe pollen intake, and follow temperature charts. Now I want to hear from you. Have you been using feeding according to a predefined calendar, or have you carefully measured biological and climatic parameters at your location? What is your method of dealing with a lack of pollen in early spring? Share your experiences in the comments below the video, because the exchange of data from different climate zones helps everyone improve their practice. If this deep biological analysis brought you concrete value, click the subscribe button and like this video. Your support is crucial for the survival of this educational documentary series. Prepare for the next step. In the next episode, we move to a completely new level of health protection in the apiary. The topic of the episode is Best Prevention, Iodine in Beekeeping. We will analyze how this powerful and often forgotten element aggressively destroys pathogens, sterilizes the environment, and dramatically raises the biological resistance of the entire colony without harmful residues. This is an episode that no serious beekeeper should miss. Protect your bees, respect the laws of biology, and see you in the next report. Honey!